Fellowship of the Broken, Making Sense of 12-Step Recovery by Angelo. Chapter 12. Refuse Collection. The refuse truck comes to my house once per week, and the team empty our bins and take away our rubbish. One week they empty the recycling bin, and the next week the general bin and garden waste. They come every week in fair weather and foul, and the service is totally reliable. If we want to dispose of big items, or the bins are overflowing, then we take a trip to the local household waste recycling site and deposit the items there. These services are paid for by our local taxes, and I'm grateful for this because it helps to keep the house free of rubbish and clutter. I'm also grateful to the men and women who work within these services. It cannot be a particularly pleasant task to spend all day working with all manner of rubbish. They provide a valuable service, and it's one that we can sometimes take for granted. In the same vein, I have occasionally watched an American reality TV show called Hoarders. The show depicts the real-life struggles of people who suffer with a condition known as compulsive hoarding disorder. Such a disorder is very often linked to other mental health conditions. The houses of these people are typically choked full of rubbish that has been collected over a period of many years. Often the living space is unusable and unhygienic, and the whole situation has become unmanageable. Despite the obvious problem, it's interesting and distressing to see how reluctant they are to part with any of their hoard. Some of the items have sentimental value, but much of it is worthless and problematic. The hoarders have become so attached to their possessions that they find it almost impossible to let go of any of it. It's all a bit of a mess, but they feel comfortable and safe in the chaos because it all feels so familiar. Family and friends try to assist them, but such offers of help are resisted because the fear of change outweighs the discomfort of the current lifestyle. Emotions often run high, and the hoarder tends to become very upset. Eventually, an experienced team help the hoarder begin the process of letting go of all the things that they perceive to be keeping them safe. Usually the show ends on a positive note, with the house being cleared and the living area returned to space, order and manageability. These metaphors again provide good insight into general human behaviours. We may not all be hoarders in the physical sense, but we do have a tendency to hoard the contents of our experience in the mind. Thoughts, images, emotions, sensations and perceptions are stored in vast quantities in our minds, and they form the narrative of our lives. And we have a strong attachment to this story because we firmly believe that this is who we are. Often these memories include trauma, heartbreak, resentment and fear, as well as more positive experiences. Emotional trauma is held energetically within what Eckhart Tolle terms the pain body. This pain body may be experienced as anxiety, anger, depression or some other negative emotional state. Elements of the pain body may be inherited, as discussed in the previous chapter, or relate to personal experiences, or even being part of a collective energy relating to a particular culture or society. All of this has taken place in the past, often in childhood, yet we keep it current in our personal minds by remaining attached. Often these old wounds will be triggered by current events, and our reactions may well create more baggage to add to the burden. Just as with the hoarders, we often hold on to all of our baggage despite the fact that it continues to cause pain, both to us and to those around us. The baggage is our story, and we cannot let it go, lest we lose touch with our sense of personal self. Our minds become so cluttered that our lives become unmanageable. The fear of change overshadows the discomfort of our current lifestyle, so we continue to try to cope using familiar strategies. We may not even realize that we could clear away the clutter, let alone become willing to actually do so. This cluttered, agitated mind lacks clarity and wisdom. It keeps us firmly trapped in the identity of the personal ego self, and hence blocks out any recognition of consciousness. This prevents universal mind and life itself from unfolding as it wants to. The hoarding instinct is stronger in some of us than others, and usually it takes a crisis or a period of suffering before we become willing to even consider taking a look at the underlying issues. Those of us who have a strong attachment to the personal story may well endure a series of severe calamities or extreme suffering before the necessary willingness materializes. For others, the critical point may come about through less dramatic circumstances. There will often be similarities in our life stories, but each of us is unique, and hence the moment of truth will differ from person to person. The net result, however, is the same. If we are going to unclutter and quieten the mind, then we will need the willingness to honestly take a look at our hoard. It will be necessary to question how valuable it really is in the context of leading a happy, peaceful, useful, and hence fulfilling life. Again, reflecting on the hoarders in the TV show, there will be initial resistance to any idea of letting go of the personal self because it is so familiar and feels so safe. We actually find comfort in discomfort because the discomfort is part of who we think we are. Some of the aspects of the personal self have great sentimental value, and other characteristics seem essential to our ongoing lives. Much of it is, however, ignominious and problematic. There is an understandable reluctance to look at those parts of ourselves that cause remorse and shame, and the personal ego mind seems to have the ability to somehow hide the truth from itself in order to remain in denial. The ego mind also has a strong tendency to blame others for all manner of problems, rather than having the humility to look at its own shortcomings and selfishness. Offers of help from family and friends are resisted, and we can, deliberately or inadvertently, become isolated from positive influences, which can make matters worse. Emotions can run high when behaviours are challenged, and we can become very distressed and upset. There can be a strong feeling of being misunderstood and shunned. Eventually, an experienced group of people with similar issues can show, through example and loving kindness, how they themselves were able to begin the process of letting go of these attachments. Often the outcome is positive, with a gradual clearing of the mind and a resulting improvement in the experience and circumstances of life. As with the hoarders, this process takes time and a great deal of work by the person and the team. The result is worth it though, because the outcome can be liberation from the restricted nature and inevitable suffering of the personal ego mind. The personal self makes the decision to unclutter the mind, and the person and the group work together to identify and let go of the many unhelpful aspects of self. The initial work focuses on the biggest and most troublesome items, but once these are dealt with, it becomes apparent that there are many more things that should also be disposed of. The attachment to some items will be stronger than others, but in due course we become willing to let go of all of them. Often the renewed willingness comes through emotional pain. As the space of the mind becomes increasingly clear, yet more smaller and less obvious elements come into view. The process is never ending, but it gradually becomes easier. The resulting freedom arising from previous efforts gives us courage and enthusiasm to keep going. In terms of the spectrum of balance between human and being, we start at 100-0 in a state of resistance and slowly change or grow towards 0-100. We never get there, of course, but as the balance changes, the positive results become progressively tangible, and this provides yet more incentive to keep detaching from purely personal interests and motives. As we clear out the clutter, the question arises as to how the items will be taken away. The big items can be taken to the tip in the form of sharing and discussing them with a supportive and experienced friend. The subsequent smaller items can simply be placed ready for collection. Our job is to be willing to let them go. By doing so, we can be confident that our refuse will eventually be collected. Once we become aware of our self-centered personal traits, then this simple act of observation will gradually dilute their influence, and sooner or later they will evaporate. This practice of awareness comes about through abiding in and as awareness, which implies contemplation and meditation. Uncluttering the mind is simple, but not easy. In this respect, the suffering inherent in the personal ego mind provides the impetus for taking on this challenging but necessary task. Refuse collection truly is a valuable service, but we have to make the effort to identify the items to be disposed of and also to become willing to let them go.